Before Greece, before Rome, before classical civilization, there was Crete, an island in the eastern Mediterranean, rocky, mountainous, strategically located between three continents. And on that island, around 3000 BC, something extraordinary emerged, a civilization so advanced it had no equal in Europe: the Minoans. In 1900, British archaeologist Arthur Evans began excavating a hill near the town of Heraklion, Crete. What he found stunned the world. A massive palace complex, multi-story buildings, elaborate frescoes, storerooms filled with pottery. Evidence of a civilization that predated classical Greece by over 1,000 years. Evans named them Minoans, after the mythological king Minos of Crete. But that was a modern invention. We don't know what they called themselves. Their own name is lost, like almost everything else about them. The palace at Knossos covered approximately 6 acres. Multi-story construction, some sections 4 or 5 floors high. Over 1,300 rooms identified, sophisticated architectural features, light wells bringing sunlight to interior rooms, ventilation systems for air circulation, indoor plumbing with running water, drainage systems to manage waste, elaborate staircases connecting floors. This wasn't primitive construction. This was advanced urban architecture in 2000 BC, when most of Europe was living in simple huts. Here's what makes the Minoans strange. They didn't build defensive walls. Knossos had no fortifications. Neither did Phaistos, Mallia, or other major Minoan sites. In the ancient world, walls were essential. Everyone built them. Protection from raiders, invaders, rivals. But the Minoans didn't. Why? Either they were so confident in their naval power that land attack was inconceivable. They had achieved such dominance that no one dared challenge them. Or something about their society didn't require defensive postures. For centuries, the Minoans lived in open palaces, unfortified, trusting, until that trust was broken. Minoan frescoes are unlike anything else in the Bronze Age. Vibrant colors, dynamic figures, nature scenes, dolphins leaping through waves, women in elaborate dresses, athletes leaping over bulls, flowers and animals in flowing patterns. The art shows a culture that valued beauty, nature, ceremony, physical grace. There's almost no warfare depicted, no conquering armies, no defeated enemies. Just life, celebration, not ritual. This is radically different from Egyptian or Mesopotamian art of the same period, which often glorified military conquest. What kind of civilization doesn't celebrate war? The Minoans had writing. 2 systems, actually. Linear A, the earlier system, used primarily for administrative records. Linear B, the later system, adapted by Mycenaean Greeks after they took over Crete. Linear B was deciphered in 1952. It's an early form of Greek, but Linear A remains unreadable. Thousands of inscriptions exist, lits, seals, pottery marks. We can see the symbols. We can count frequency. We can guess at structure. But we can't read a single sentence. An entire civilization's written language is locked away, incomprehensible. Their thoughts, their records, their history, all exist in symbols we cannot decode. Around 1450 BC, Minoan civilization collapsed. Palaces were destroyed, some burned, some abandoned. Within a generation or two, the Minoans were gone. Mycenaean Greeks moved in, took over the palaces, adapted the culture, but the Minoans themselves vanished. Their descendants were absorbed, their language replaced, their identity erased. Within a few centuries, Greeks told stories of King Minos and the Minotaur. They remembered the palaces as mythological locations, not historical ones. The Minoans had become legend. How does a civilization this advanced disappear so completely? How does a culture with writing, art, architecture, and trade networks vanish within a generation? And how do we explain a society so peaceful they didn't build walls, in an ancient world defined by violence? The Minoans are asking these questions across 3,500 years, and we still don't have complete answers. The Minoans weren't just artistically advanced. They were technologically sophisticated in ways that wouldn't be matched for over 1,000 years. The plumbing systems. At Knossos, archaeologists found something unexpected. Indoor plumbing, terracotta pipes running through the palace, connected to freshwater supply systems, drainage channels, what appeared to be flush toilets. The pipes were tapered, wider at one end than the other, creating water pressure and self-cleaning flow. This engineering principle wasn't rediscovered until Roman times. Over 1,000 years later, the Minoans had running water in 2000 BC. The drainage engineering. Crete experiences heavy seasonal rainfall. The Minoans engineered sophisticated drainage systems. Channels beneath floors, catch basins for overflow, sloped surfaces directing water away from structures. At Knossos, the drainage system spans the entire palace complex. It prevented flooding, managed waste, maintained sanitation. This wasn't accidental. This was planned urban infrastructure. The light wells. Minoan palaces were massive. Interior rooms had no windows. Solution: light wells. Vertical shafts cut through multiple floors, open to the sky. Light would enter from above and illuminate interior spaces. The same shafts provided ventilation, hot air rising, drawing cooler air through the building. Passive climate control. In the Bronze Age, the construction techniques Minoan builders used: cut stone blocks, ashlar masonry, wooden beams for earthquake resistance, gypsum for interior surfaces, alabaster for decorative elements. The wooden beam technique is particularly clever. Crete is earthquake-prone. Rigid stone buildings crack and collapse. But wooden beams flex. They absorb seismic energy. They allow the building to move without breaking. The Minoans built earthquake-resistant structures 4,000 years ago. The road networks. Archaeological surveys have found paved roads connecting Minoan centers. Not dirt paths, paved surfaces. Some roads had drainage channels alongside. This infrastructure suggests organized government capable of public works, trade moving overland as well as by sea. Central planning coordinating construction roads require maintenance. Organization authority. The Minoans had all three. The storage systems. Minoan palaces contain massive storage areas. At Knossos, the magazines, storerooms held giant ceramic jars, pithoi, for oil and grain. Some jars stand 6 feet tall, hundreds of them in rows. This suggests agricultural surplus, centralized collection and distribution, economic organization at palace level. The palace wasn't just a residence. It was an economic hub, collecting tribute, storing goods, redistributing to the population. The pottery technology. Minoan potters used fast pottery wheels, controlled firing temperatures, distinctive decorative techniques. Kamares ware, a Minoan pottery style, is among the finest Bronze Age ceramics. Thin walls, elaborate decoration, technical precision. It was exported across the Mediterranean, prized as luxury goods. Egyptian tombs contain Minoan pottery. Minoan goods reached Mesopotamia. Their craftsmanship was internationally recognized. The shipbuilding. The Minoans dominated Mediterranean trade for centuries. This required seaworthy vessels, navigation knowledge, shipbuilding capacity. Frescoes show Minoan ships with multiple oars, central masts, sleek hulls designed for speed. No Minoan ship has been recovered intact, but representations suggest sophisticated naval technology. They controlled sea lanes, protected trade routes, projected power through naval dominance. This is why they didn't need walls. The sea was their wall. The calendar systems. Evidence suggests the Minoans tracked agricultural seasons, religious festivals, astronomical events. Certain architectural alignments at Knossos correspond to solar positions. The Minoans likely had calendar systems guiding planting, harvest, and ceremony. Astronomical observation, mathematical calculation. Practical application, all in the Bronze Age. The question: How did a civilization this sophisticated emerge on a relatively small island? Where did the knowledge come from? And why, after achieving such heights, did it all collapse so suddenly? The Minoans wrote. We have their tablets, their inscriptions, their symbols carved into stone and pressed into clay, but we cannot read them. Linear A remains undeciphered, one of the great puzzles of ancient history, and with it the entire Minoan story remains locked away. The writing systems. Crete produced 3 writing systems in the Bronze Age. 1. Cretan hieroglyphic, the earliest, pictographic, used on seals and some tablets. 2. Linear A, developed later, more abstract, used for administrative records. Linear B, adapted from Linear A by Mycenaean Greeks. Deciphered in 1952, Linear B is readable. It's an early form of Greek. But Linear A, still a mystery. The decipherment problem. In 1952, architect Michael Ventris cracked Linear B. He proved it was Greek. Suddenly, Mycenaean records could be read. Scholars assumed Linear A would follow quickly. It didn't. 73 years later, Linear A remains undeciphered. Why? The core challenge. To decipher an unknown script, you need 1. A bilingual text, same content in known and unknown languages. 2. Enough text samples to identify patterns. 3. Knowledge of what language the script represents. For Linear A, we have no bilingual texts, limited samples, mostly short administrative records, no idea what language underlies the script. We can identify some sound values by comparing to Linear B, which borrowed signs from Linear A. But knowing how to pronounce a word doesn't tell you what it means. If you see karana in Linear A, you can sound it out. But what does karana mean? Without knowing the language, you're stuck. Linear A doesn't appear to be. Greek, Linear B is Greek, but Linear A isn't. Semitic doesn't match known Semitic patterns. Indo-European doesn't fit the family. It seems to be a language isolate, unrelated to any known language family, like Basque, like Sumerian, a linguistic orphan. If the Minoan language has no surviving relatives, we have almost no way to decode meaning. We can only guess from context. What we think we know. From context and comparison, scholars have proposed KURO appears at the end of the lists, possibly meaning total. Certain signs appear with commodity symbols, possibly units or quantities. Some words recur in religious contexts, possibly deity names or ritual terms, but these are educated guesses, not certainties. We can't read a single complete sentence with confidence. The religious texts. Some Linear A inscriptions appear on offering tables and religious objects. These might be prayers, dedications, ritual formulas, but we can't read them. The Minoan religion, their gods, their myths, their beliefs, remains almost entirely unknown. We see images of ceremonies, bull leaping processions, snake goddesses, but we don't know what they mean. The visual record exists. The explanatory text is unreadable. The historical implications. Because we can't read Linear A, we don't know what the Minoans called themselves, what their kings were named, what historical events they recorded, what laws governed their society, what myths they told, what they believed about life, death, and the divine. We have an advanced civilization's material remains, but their voice is silent. The comparison. Imagine if we couldn't read Latin. We'd have Roman buildings, Roman roads, Roman art, but we wouldn't know their history, their literature, their laws. We'd be guessing at everything. That's where we are with the Minoans. The ongoing attempts. Scholars keep trying. New statistical methods. Computer analysis. Cross-referencing with other Bronze Age languages. Occasionally, someone claims a breakthrough. Usually, it's rejected by other experts. The consensus remains. Linear A is undeciphered, and may remain so forever, unless A bilingual inscription is discovered. A related language is identified. New analytical methods crack the code. Until then, the Minoans speak in symbols we cannot understand. The silence. 3,500 years ago, a Minoan scribe pressed a stylus into wet clay. They recorded something, a transaction, a prayer, a story. That clay tablet survived. The words are still visible. But we cannot read them. We're staring at their voice and hearing only silence. That silence covers an entire civilization, their thoughts, their history, their identity, all locked in symbols we cannot decode. Most Bronze Age superpowers bragged in stone about their armies. The Minoans bragged with ships. Crete sits in the middle of the eastern Mediterranean, between Greece, Anatolia, Egypt, and the Levant. The Minoans turned that geography into power. The thalassocracy. Ancient writers used one word for what the Minoans had: thalassocracy. Rule of the sea. For hundreds of years, Minoan ships carried goods across the Mediterranean, connected port towns from Egypt to Cyprus to mainland Greece, brought wealth back to Crete's palaces. They exported fine pottery, olive oil, wine, crafted goods and luxury items. They imported copper from Cyprus, tin from afar for bronze, gold, ivory, and exotic materials from Egypt and beyond. Their economic reach was far bigger than their island. No walls, only ships. The lack of defensive walls around Minoan palaces suddenly makes sense. Their defense wasn't stone, it was control of sea routes, naval dominance, economic leverage. If you control the ships, you control trade. You control who gets rich. You can punish enemies by cutting them off. Why build walls on land when you've already built an invisible wall of naval power? Cultural footprints abroad. Minoan influence appears all over the Mediterranean. Minoan fresco styles echo at Akrotiri on Santorini. Minoan pottery shows up in Egyptian tombs. Minoan-style architecture appears at sites in the Aegean Islands. Sometimes, they colonized directly. Other times, locals copied them. Elites imported their style to signal status. Either way, Minoan culture spread as far as their ships could sail. A civilization that didn't worship war, look at Minoan art. You see, dancers, priests and priestesses, bull leapers, dolphins and lilies. What you don't see much of: armies, battle scenes, kings smiting enemies. Compared to Egypt or Mesopotamia, the absence is striking. This doesn't mean they never fought, but it suggests their identity wasn't built around conquest. Power came from trade, ritual, and control of the sea, not endless war. They were a different kind of superpower, the fragility of a sea empire. Sea empires are powerful, but fragile. They depend on stable trade routes, safe harbors, predictable weather, ships and sailors in constant motion. Disrupt that system by volcano, earthquake, invasion, economic shock, and the empire can unravel. The Minoans built their world on water. When the water turned against them, they had nothing solid to fall back on. Some collapses are gradual. The Minoan one had a trigger. North of Crete lies the island of Thera, modern Santorini. Around 1600 BC, exact date debated, its volcano exploded in one of the largest eruptions in recorded history. The Thera Eruption. The explosion blew out the center of the island, created the iconic caldera we see today, launched ash high into the atmosphere, sent tsunamis racing across the Aegean. For the Minoans, this was a nightmare. Possible impacts on Crete: tsunamis smashing northern coastal towns, ashfall damaging crops, shockwaves and earthquakes weakening buildings. Trade disrupted as harbors were damaged and sea routes turned hostile. Yet, here's the twist: the Minoans survived Thera. Palaces on Crete continued functioning for another 100 to 150 years after the eruption. Thera hurt them. It didn't finish them. the aftershocks that killed a civilization. Around 1450 BC, something else happened. Archaeological evidence shows major Minoan palaces, except Knossos, destroyed or burned. Sites abandoned rapidly. Mycenaean Greek presence rising immediately afterward. Possibilities: a second wave of earthquakes. Internal revolt as weakened elites lost control. Mycenaean invasion, taking advantage of a destabilized Crete. All of the above stacked. The architectural layers tell the story. Rich Minoan phase, destruction layer. Thinner Mycenaean rebuilds on top. Minoan civilization didn't simply fade away. It was knocked down and replaced. The Mycenaean takeover. After the destruction, Mycenaean Greeks from mainland Greece take control of Crete. Linear B Greek tablets appear at Knossos. Art and religion shift to more Mycenaean styles. They reused Minoan palaces, adopted Minoan symbols and goddesses, inserted their own language and power structure. It's like someone moving into a luxury house after the owners vanish. Keeping the furniture, repainting the walls, hanging new portraits over old frescoes. The shell remained Minoan, the occupants did not. When myth remembers history. Centuries later, Greeks told stories. King Minos, tyrant of Crete. The labyrinth beneath his palace. The half-man, half-bull Minotaur. The Athenian hero Theseus who killed the beast and escaped with Ariadne's help. Strip away the mythic layers and something echoes. A powerful king in Crete. A confusing, maze-like palace. Bulls central to ritual and imagery. Mainland Greeks challenging Cretan power. It sounds like a distorted folk memory of Minoan Crete and Mycenaean conquest. By then, the real history was gone. Only stories remained. Myth took the place of memory. A civilization killed twice. The Minoans died twice. First, their palaces fell. Their system collapsed. Their language stopped being written. Second, their identity was absorbed. Their story was mythologized. Their real name was forgotten. By the time historians arrived, they had ruins. They had myths. They had no living memory. Exactly what will happen to us if we collapse without leaving clear records future people can read. The Minoans had multi-story palaces with plumbing, seismic-resistant architecture, international trade networks, complex religion and ritual, a written language. They were, for a time, the most advanced culture in Europe. And yet today, we don't know their real name. We can't read their words. We reconstruct their history from ruins and guesswork. Most people know them only as footnotes in Greek myth. That's not just their story. It's a warning about ours. You can be advanced and still disappear. Being ahead of your time doesn't protect you from volcanoes, earthquakes, climate shifts, invasion, internal collapse. The Minoans had technology Rome wouldn't match for 1,000 years. It didn't save them. We have technology far beyond theirs. That doesn't guarantee survival either. If anything, it increases how far we can fall. Memory fails faster than stone. What survived of the Minoans? Walls, floors, frescoes, pottery, a script we can't read. What didn't survive? Names, stories, laws, internal debates, voices. The physical shells remain. The minds are gone. We're doing something even more fragile. Storing most of our knowledge in digital formats, relying on systems that die without power, writing in ways that assume continuous cultural context. If our Thera moment comes and the grid doesn't come back, our own linear A awaits us. Unreadable archives in dead formats. Myth fills the void. When you lose real history, myth moves in. The Greeks didn't remember Minoan Crete, thalassocratic power with advanced plumbing. They remembered a tyrant king, a monster in a maze, a hero with a sword, a princess with a thread. Because stories outlive facts. Narrative survives where data doesn't. If we collapse, future people won't remember. Exact timelines, GDP figures, technical specs. They'll remember. Stories about our hubris. Legends of the age of machines. Myths about the people who tried to control the world and failed. We're already turning the Minoans into that. The real question the Minoans leave us. Not, how did they fall? We know the mechanics. Environmental stress. Natural disaster. Foreign takeover. Fragile dependence on trade systems. The deeper question is, what are we doing differently so our story doesn't end the same way? Are we building knowledge that can survive collapse? Encoding warnings in simple, durable forms? Respecting environmental limits? Or repeating the same pattern with better tools and worse stakes? Minoan Crete shows a world-leading civilization can vanish so thoroughly that its capital becomes the stuff of monster stories. Its writing can become decorative scratches no one can read. Its real achievements can be overshadowed by the myths that replace them. We like to think we're immune to that. The ruins of Knossos suggest otherwise. Around 1450 BC, Minoan civilization ended, but the Minoans themselves didn't vanish into thin air. They walked into history's fog. When Knossos fell, where did 100,000 plus people go? Some fled to smaller towns on Crete. Some migrated to Aegean islands, others sailed to mainland Greece or Cyprus. They scattered into rural villages, retreating to subsistence agriculture. Archaeological evidence suggests the population dropped dramatically. The grand palaces were never rebuilt. The Minoans didn't die, they devolved. From palace dwellers to villagers. From maritime traders to local farmers. Their civilization collapsed, but the people remained. Reduced, dispersed, forgotten. The Greeks from mainland Greece didn't destroy Crete entirely. They moved in, took over the best sites, adopted Minoan technology and art. But they replaced linear A with linear B, changed the gods' names, and imposed Greek hierarchy. Over generations, Minoan and Mycenaean mixed. Distinct identities blurred. The Minoan language died out. Their writing system was abandoned. By 1200 BC, you couldn't tell a Minoan from a Greek. The most tragic part, when Mycenaean Greeks replaced linear A with linear B, they didn't preserve the old texts. They weren't treasured, they weren't studied, they weren't copied, they were just left behind. Most were buried or scattered. All the administrative records, all the religious texts, all the poetry or philosophy that might have existed, gone. Replaced, rendered unreadable by the conquest that overran them. Greeks remembered Crete and its old king Minos as legend. The labyrinth was real. It was Knossos. The Minotaur was real in a sense. It was the bull-leaping cult that Greeks found alien. The hero Theseus conquering Crete reflected real conquest, by the Mycenaean Greeks, not by mythic heroes. Real history transformed into story because the people who lived it were gone. Their language was unreadable. Their explanation of themselves had vanished. Future Greeks filled the void with narrative. The Minoans were erased twice, by the Mycenaean conquest and cultural absorption. Second, by the mythologization that replaced history. Between erasure and myth, the real Minoans, their voices, their names, their thoughts, disappeared. We have their buildings, their pottery, their frescoes, their undecipherable tablets. We don't have their words, their stories told in their own voice. Every scholar who studies the Minoans is translating fragments into narratives the Minoans themselves never wrote. We're inventing their history from silence. Modern Cretans don't have a strong cultural memory of the Minoans. Why would they? It's been 300-500 years. Languages have changed. Religions have changed. Entire populations have turned over. Some Cretans know they live where an ancient civilization flourished. But that's tourism knowledge, not inherited memory. The real Minoan identity died long ago. What remains is archaeological sites, tourist attractions, academic study, and stories that have more myth than history. The Minoans rose to the top of their world. They built beauty. They created complexity. They achieved sophistication that wouldn't be replicated for a millennium. And then it all ended. Not because they were stupid, not because they failed to try, but because they depended on systems that could fail. They built on fragile ground. They controlled trade networks that could be disrupted. They had no redundancy, no backup plan. When the pressure came, they broke. We're building the same house. The Minoans created a maritime empire. When the seas turned hostile, the empire collapsed. We're creating a global digital empire. When the networks turn hostile, solar flares, EMPs, cyber warfare, grid failure, what happens? The Minoans had no walls because they assumed naval dominance was permanent. We have no air-gapped archives because we assume the internet is permanent. We're both betting on systems outside our control. Their silence echoes. The Minoans had a written language. Thousands of tablets survive. We cannot read a single sentence. That should terrify us. They left messages, physical, durable, carefully inscribed, and we can't decode them. Imagine, in 3,500 years, someone finds a hard drive with our emails on it. The file formats are incompatible. The language is known, English, but the context is lost. The tech ecosystem is dead. The databases are inaccessible. That's what we've done to Linear A. Except we're making it worse, encoding knowledge in formats that require specific electricity, specific operating systems, specific institutional memory to access. We're making it easier to lose. The Minoans became myth. Their real story, what they actually believed, actually did, actually thought, is lost. We remember caricatures, a tyrannical king, a monster, a maze, not the truth. We're already doing this to ourselves. History gets compressed into myth. Facts get simplified into stories. The Minoans become the guys with the palace, not the sophisticated maritime traders with advanced plumbing and a writing system we can't read. In 3,500 years, we'll become the guys with the internet. Not the complex, contradictory, actual people we are. Our truth will be lost to mythology. The Minoans possessed knowledge, plumbing, architecture, navigation, trade, networks. When their civilization collapsed, the knowledge holders dispersed. The knowledge wasn't written in accessible ways. The knowledge died with the specialists. We think we've solved this. We have books, databases, the internet. But books rot. Databases become inaccessible. The internet requires power and infrastructure. Strip away electricity, internet connectivity, and modern institutions. How much of our knowledge survives? The Minoans didn't have the internet, but they had something. A written language, oral traditions, apprenticeships. It didn't save them. Our technology is more sophisticated. But fragility is fragility, no matter how advanced. Advanced civilization plus natural disaster plus fragile dependencies, Hitsut collapse. The Minoans fit this pattern. So do Rome, the Maya, Cahokia, the Olmec, Angkor, Wat, every advanced civilization we study. What pattern are we fitting? In 3,500 years, some future civilization will find our ruins. They'll excavate servers and fiber optic cables. They'll find incomprehensible symbols and dead hardware. They'll tell myths about the people who tried to build heaven and failed. They'll know we were advanced. They won't know why we built what we built. They won't understand our values, our fears, our dreams, like we don't understand the Minoans. They'll look at our ruins and ask, what were they thinking? What made them so sure they wouldn't fall? And there will be no answer. Only silence. And maybe, somewhere in the ruins, a hard drive, unreadable, waiting for someone to crack the code, and finding that we've already made sure they never will.